Katie Wilson and you're watching E! News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Iran vows revenge as missiles hit Israel, whilst a top US official resigns over the war. France rules out joining efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, exposing divisions with Washington. Starmer and Zelensky warn the world must not lose focus on Ukraine despite the Iran war. Thanks for joining us. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has vowed to avenge the death of top official Ali Larijani, promising harsh revenge against those responsible for the strike. Retaliatory attacks between Iran and Israel overnight have spread to multiple fronts, including Lebanon and Iraq. As the situation intensifies, the crisis is also prompting political reactions in Washington.
Iran has vowed strong retaliation after the killing of senior official Ali Larijani, who died in a strike in Tehran on Tuesday. Iranian state television says the country responded by launching multiple missiles toward Israel, describing the attack as a direct act of revenge. Some of the missiles were reported to carry cluster munitions. In central Israel, at least 2 people were killed when a missile struck a residential neighborhood in Ramat Gan, near Tel Aviv. Emergency services say several others were injured. Air raid sirens sounded across Tel Aviv and Jerusalem as the barrage lit up the night sky. The Israeli military confirmed it had identified missile launches from Iran and said several locations in central Israel were hit. Police are continuing to assess the damage as rescue teams search affected areas. As the United States continues to back Israel in its strikes on Iran, the conflict is also triggering political reaction in Washington. Joe Kent, head of the National Counterterrorism Center under Donald Trump, has resigned over the war. In a public statement, Kent said he could not support the conflict, arguing that Iran posed no immediate threat to the United States. In Iraq, the US Embassy in Baghdad once again came under attack. According to Iraqi security officials, drones and rockets targeted the heavily fortified Green Zone. At least one strike caused a fire after air defenses failed to intercept it. Meanwhile, Israel carried out overnight strikes in Beirut. The Israeli military says it targeted sites linked to Hezbollah, including missile launchers and infrastructure. Israel claims the strikes come in response to continued attacks from the group, signaling a growing front in Lebanon.
Well, Iran has lost one of its most powerful and influential figures in Ali Larijani, a key architect of the country's security strategy. Iranian media confirmed his death in an Israeli airstrike on Monday.
At the center of Iran's power structure stood a figure who shaped its security, diplomacy, and political direction for decades: Ali Larijani. He was widely seen as an architect of Iran's security strategy and one of the Islamic Republic's most influential power brokers. He was killed in an Israeli strike, according to Israeli and US officials, with Iranian media later confirming his death, marking a major moment in the escalating conflict. A veteran insider and close advisor to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Larijani held influence across multiple centers of power. Born in 1958 into a prominent clerical family, often referred to as the Kennedys of Iran, he rose through the ranks of the Islamic Republic. He was also a member of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps during the Iran-Iraq War, a background that cemented his ties to Iran's security establishment. In the 1990s, he led Iran's state broadcaster from 1994 to 2004, a key role in shaping the country's internal messaging. He later moved into the core of Iran's security establishment, serving as Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council and as Iran's chief nuclear negotiator between 2005 and 2007. In 2008, he became Speaker of Parliament, a position he held for 12 years until 2020. In August 2025, he returned as Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, overseeing defense, intelligence, and foreign policy. Since early 2026, he re-emerged as one of the most dominant figures in the system, with some analysts describing him as a de facto leader. Some analysts argue his loss may be even more consequential than that of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, due to his hands-on role in managing Iran's strategy. He played a central role in shaping Iran's response to tensions with Israel and the United States, while managing regional ties and global partnerships. He was also linked to the government's response to internal unrest, a role that drew international criticism and sanctions. Though often described as a pragmatist, he remained firmly committed to Iran's theocratic system, balancing diplomacy with hardline positions. He also served as a public face of the leadership, projecting its message through diplomacy and media. With decades of experience across Iran's political, security, and diplomatic spheres, he remained one of the few figures capable of navigating the entire system. In a structure built on continuity and control, Ali Larijani was more than a political figure. He was a central pillar. And at a time of war and uncertainty, his death could have consequences far beyond Iran's borders.
Well, the US has intensified its military actions against Iran, targeting sites near the Strait of Hormuz. Officials say the strikes aim to protect shipping lanes and stabilize energy markets. However, concerns are growing over the wider economic impact of the conflict. Our correspondent Ubi Shabandar has more from Washington.
U.S. Central Command has said that the U.S. military has successfully dropped multiple 5,000-pound deep penetrator bombs on top of hardened Iranian missile sites along Iran's coastline near the Strait of Hormuz. These sites were believed to hold anti-ship cruise missiles that were used to target ships traversing the strategic waterway. President Trump has been pressing key allies to work jointly with the U.S. to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and stabilize global energy prices. U.S. oil executives have reportedly warned the administration that the energy crisis caused by the war with Iran could worsen due to the disruption to shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump earlier in the week said that the U.S. and Israeli strikes against Iran have destroyed a number of factories that are producing long-range missiles, and that all military installations on the Iranian Kharg Island, which lies in the middle of the Strait of Hormuz, have been destroyed. Trump said that he's pushing allies to do more to support efforts to prevent Iran from threatening energy supplies from moving through the Strait of Hormuz. And he called Iran a, quote, paper tiger. And while Iran's missile and drone launches against the region have significantly dropped in number, they are still able to hit Tel Aviv and Dubai while continuing to target Saudi Arabia's oil fields. And according to fresh reports from Washington, the Trump administration is planning to ease Venezuelan oil sanctions in order to boost oil supplies and attempt to drive down oil prices. And the Pentagon has said that it plans to mass produce U.S. kamikaze drones after their successful use in recent strikes against Iranian military facilities. I'm Ubi Shabandar, A News, Washington.
Well, in the past 24 hours, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israeli forces have killed 2 senior Iranian figures. He framed the strikes as enabling Iranians to celebrate Nowruz, adding, "We're watching from above."
I'm here with Israel's defense minister, our chief of staff, the head of the Mossad, the chief of Air Force, our senior commanders. In the past 24 hours, we knocked out 2 of the terrorist chieftains, the top terrorist chieftains of this tyranny. Our aircraft are hitting the terror operatives on the ground, in the crossroads, in the city squares. This is meant to enable the brave people of Iran to celebrate the Festival of Fire. So celebrate and Happy Nowruz. We're watching from above.
France has ruled out joining any military operation to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. President Emmanuel Macron emphasised that Paris will not be drawn in whilst tensions persist. The decision highlights a growing divide with President Trump as European allies lean towards caution and sustained defence cooperation rather than direct involvement.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, as France rules out joining any military effort to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, dealing a fresh blow to U.S. efforts to build a coalition. French President Emmanuel Macron said Paris would never take part in operations to unblock the strategic waterway while hostilities continue, stressing France is not a party to the Iran conflict. Macron appeared to push back against suggestions from Washington that allies should support U.S.-led action. Instead, French officials say any role in securing the strait would only come after de-escalation, potentially through an international escort mission agreed with partners and involving dialogue with Iran. France's position reflects a broader reluctance among Western allies to be drawn into the conflict, even as the closure of the Strait of Hormuz disrupts global energy supplies. But that reluctance is further frustrating Washington. U.S. President Donald Trump warned that NATO allies are making a very foolish mistake by refusing to take part in operations to secure the strait, a vital route for global oil shipments. This follows his earlier comments about NATO possibly facing a very bad future if allies fail to support U.S. efforts. At the same time, Europe continues to strengthen its own defense capabilities amid security threats from the Ukraine war and the Mideast crisis. The UK, Finland, and the Netherlands are looking into setting up a new financing mechanism by next year to aggregate demand, drive joint procurement, accelerate defense investment, and increase the availability of critical capabilities such as munitions. The initiative would complement NATO and EU efforts while making defense spending more efficient. Dutch Finance Minister Eelco Heijnen says it would be a new way of defense cooperation with European partners and that he's open to like-minded Western partners in and outside the EU. All these developments underline a widening transatlantic divide, with the U.S. pushing for military action to secure global energy routes, while European allies prioritize caution, coordination, and long-term defense cooperation over direct involvement in the Iran conflict. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Well, amid the ongoing war in the Middle East, the UK says the focus must still remain firmly on Ukraine, with Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer warning that President Putin must not benefit from the wider crisis. Speaking alongside President Zelensky, both leaders emphasised continued support and closer defence cooperation.
The focus must remain on Ukraine despite the Iran war. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said it during their meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Downing Street on Tuesday. Both leaders warned that global attention must remain on Ukraine despite the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Welcoming Zelensky, Starmer stressed that support for Ukraine must not weaken, warning that President Vladimir Putin must not gain from the wider instability. The talks come at a critical moment with rising tensions in the region, fueling concerns that higher oil prices and shifting international focus could benefit Russia's war effort. The US has temporarily eased sanctions on some Russian oil to tackle surging prices triggered by the conflict in the Middle East.
It's really important that we're clear and consistent that Putin can't be the one who benefits from the conflict in Iran, whether that's oil prices or the dropping of sanctions. It is really important that we keep up our resolve in relation to supporting Ukraine and doing everything we can to weaken the hand of Putin.
Also not to forget about our diplomatic efforts, negotiations, and where we are with Americans and with Russians. We have to discuss this sensitive topic Yes, and of course about Middle East, you mentioned it has big influence, I think, on Ukraine and on Europe. So thank you again for your support and thanks to your people.
Later in a speech in parliament, Zelensky described the regimes in Russia and Iran as brothers in hatred. He mentioned how Tehran was selling Shahid kamikaze drones to Moscow, which had been used in Ukraine. During their meeting, the two leaders agreed a new defense partnership focused on drone technology, now seen as central to modern warfare. The deal will combine Ukraine's battlefield experience with UK's industrial capacity to produce and supply advanced systems. The UK has also pledged £500,000 funding for an artificial intelligence centre in Kiev to support defence innovation and strengthen Ukraine's capabilities on the front line. Zelensky ended his speech saying Europe is a global force that can stand against any other power. He called for closer UK cooperation and shared defence technology, warning people should never again have to live under drones. Zaina Farizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
An EU diplomatic source says a €90 billion loan package for Ukraine has been agreed, with a formal decision expected imminently. That's according to a Bulgarian national radio source. European Council President Antonio Costa reportedly pressed Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban to stand by the commitment reached by leaders in December. At tomorrow's summit, leaders are set to address the war in Iran, ongoing support for Ukraine, and the impact of elevated energy prices across the bloc. Well, after the break, we'll be hearing more about Zelensky's meeting with Starmer and what the conflict in the Middle East means for Ukraine. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned against division among Western leaders following Trump's criticism of NATO allies. He said he had a very bad feeling about the impact of the war in Iran on Ukraine. Joining us from Kyiv to discuss this is Senior Editor of Issue Insight, John Kavelich. Thank you for being with us. Now, in the past few minutes, Zelensky has said Ukraine will face a deficit of missiles due to the war in the Middle East. Does this come as a surprise to you?
No, it's not a surprise, and also not a surprise how he's handling it, which is to, in essence, target President Trump, and generally no good comes from that.
That's interesting. So you're in Kyiv at the moment. How's the atmosphere over there?
You know, we always use the word resilient during the last 5 years, but they're also, appreciating also an overused phrase, the new normal. Prior to 19 days ago, when Israel and the U.S. attacked Iran, there was optimism. And not only among the public, not a lot of optimism, but optimism over the 50% threshold, but also amongst the teams that were discussing and negotiating and meeting and dialoguing with the Russian Federation and with Ukraine and with the U.S. And there was a trajectory that this year, the fighting component of the conflict, of the war, not everything else, not peace, not the politics of it, but the fighting component had a trajectory to end. And Iran has disrupted that and disrupted what Ukraine needs, disrupted what Russia is getting, disrupted the EU's role, just a lot of disruption. And now there's unknown, and everyone's just waiting to see what Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump are going to do.
Now, we're seeing pictures of Zelensky's meeting with Sir Keir Starmer now, and even NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was there at that address. So surely there's some hope that Ukraine isn't being forgotten here.
Well, President Zelensky, he doesn't tolerate well being ignored. And not to equate him, but the late Fidel Castro, president of Cuba, was the same way. Hated to be ignored, always wanted to be relevant. And in President Zelensky's case, he has just watched over the last 5 years this bell curve where the interest level toward toward Ukraine increased, but now we're past 5 years and $500 billion combined going into Ukraine, and roughly 3 years where the real estate, meaning how much territory of Ukraine Russia controls, hasn't really changed. And you have then these natural disasters. You have what's happened in Syria, what's happened in Gaza, what's happening now in Iran. And every day that pushes Ukraine off the front page. And he, being a former television actor and producer, he knows about media relevance and how important that is. But he sometimes pushes too hard. And in this case, running to Keir Starmer at the precise moment that President Trump has been criticizing for Keir Starmer, particularly saying nice guy, not Churchill, can't really deliver anything. The UK has lots of budget issues. What they can do militarily is really questionable. And so President Zelensky goes, sees President Macron, now Prime Minister Starmer. I don't really know how much that's going to actually do in terms of helping Ukraine.
It's interesting you have that view, as Zelensky's been interviewed by UK media and has been saying he hopes that Starmer and Trump will find common ground, and he seems to be using the visit to push that. Do you think that will make any difference? Do you think he's already thought this through?
No, and that's one of the problems. He starts off well and then usually does something to harm it. For example, when the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran, he then went and said, look, we know drones and we can help and we'd like to help. So Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, everybody, let us know what we can do. But then he went and said, but what we want in return, money, we want your Patriots and your Tomahawks. And that was where he always harms himself. Because if he had just said, here, what can we do to help you and your populations, he would have gotten more in return because people know his circumstances. But there's that sort of quid pro quo. And then with going to see President Macron, going to see Prime Minister Starmer, suggesting Prime Minister Starmer and Trump meet. He also suggested he and Trump meet. Well, again, he's not paying attention to details because President Trump is criticizing Keir Starmer, not very interested in dialoguing with him. President Trump isn't happy with him either, and has some to do with NATO, but more to do with ships in the Hormuz Strait. And so President Zelensky is suggesting these dialogues and these meetings, and that only angers President Trump even further because he then feels he needs to comment on it, and the comment isn't going to be good.
It's interesting how these two conflicts seem to be overlapping, and another way that that's happening is with oil, and we're already seeing an easing of sanctions on Russian oil. So what does President Putin stand to gain from this conflict?
Yeah, and that decision by President Trump, the suspending from March 12th, anything that was on a vessel from March 12th to, I think it's April 13th or April 11th, is basically good to go. So wherever you find a oil tanker that's floating around in one of the oceans or one of the seas or one of the anywhere, it's good to go. From Ukraine's perspective, here, when they heard that, it was, that proverbial gut punch. It was just like, really? You just didn't do this to us. You didn't basically hand President Putin the winning lottery ticket and at our expense. But here's where we are. And so for President Putin, it's done a couple of things. One, yes, the oil was already out of the ground, but it was out of the ground at then a lower price point. So anything that's sold, he's going to be making, a decent amount of money. The estimates are 150 million a day, and maybe 3 billion or 5 billion or more. We're into day 19 of the war. The oil that India's buying and China's buying, they got 30 days of that. So potentially, tens of billions of dollars that could flow into Russia. But the most important element to it is not the money that Russia's getting. It's the legitimacy that they're getting. It's recognition that the world economy needs them, and the recognition that the President of the United States still wants to engage with them. And that infuriates not only Ukraine, but the supporter of Ukraine, as well as members of the European Union.
In that strategy from Iran to block the Strait of Hormuz, do you think Vladimir Putin had a hand in that in any way?
There's a lot of intelligence that's been made public. There's intelligence that hasn't yet been made public. I'm not going to delve too deep into it, but I'll posit it this way: if the Iranians did ask the Russian Federation, what can we do to help you? What the Iranian government is doing with respect to the Strait of Hormuz would probably be pretty high up on the Russian Federation government's list of, that's a good idea. We can live with that. At the same time, there's a tipping point to everything. And there's a tipping point to how much physical destruction Israel and the US can do to Iran, where you tip from trying to help the citizens revolt against the government to killing a lot of the civilians, scaring them, destroying much of the infrastructure, and then there's nothing really from which they can do anything. So there's always a balance. But Iran came to their help with drones, initially selling Shahed drones to Russia, and then Russia was sort of licensing and then sort of stealing some of the technology and then beginning to make them themselves. So the war disrupted a lot of actual transit of product because a lot of it was now being manufactured within Russia. So Iran pretty much helped them. But for the Russians, they're watching this, and it depletes inventories of military equipment that could go to Ukraine. That benefits them. It's a lot more money being spent on military, which more and more civilian populations, particularly in the EU and NATO countries, don't want. They want healthcare, education, and infrastructure. They don't want tanks and missiles and aircraft carriers. And so for the Russian Federation, the last 19 days, they're not upset about it at all.
And since 2022, since Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine has withstood other conflicts. For example, October the 7th and the conflict since that came after the full-scale invasion. Do you have a sense that these 19 days have been something different, or is this just another thing that Ukraine has to withhold?
Both. It's another event that they have to absorb, and then develop a strategy around how do we absorb it. But it is much more impactful than October 7th with Gaza, because Gaza was basically Israel killing a lot of people in Gaza, killing a lot of Muslims, and a lot of the military equipment they used came from the United States, the Biden-Harris administration. This is different because in this case, you have not only the US sending a lot of military equipment to the Gulf states, but it's the type of military equipment that the Trump administration has transitioned to selling to other countries who then in turn either sell it or give it to Ukraine. So what Ukraine is facing now is a meaningful inventory issue because the EU governments, the NATO member governments, they don't have the production capacity. And the US, when someone today orders a Patriot missile, they're not going to see it for 2 years. So there's an incredible backlog amongst companies to fulfill orders, not only US, but in other countries. And then the challenge is they're afraid to put too much capital behind, because what if the war in Ukraine ends? And what if the war in the Israel-US war on Iran ends? And what if the Iranian government is decapitated in terms of, a year or 6 months from now, it's no longer the Islamic Republic of Iran, it's the Democratic Republic of Iran. What happens if President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu actually succeed? And then you're going to have the issue of the peace dividend. And we had that back in 91 when the USSR went out of business. But then you're going to have people, populations in all these countries, the taxpayers, the voters say, wait a minute, do we really want to be spending all this money? The war's over in Russia and Ukraine. Could start again, but it's over. Iran seems to be taken care of. Israel, there's nothing left for them to destroy in Gaza, so that becomes political. And that's going to be sort of the next chapter here, and the Ukrainians are trying to figure this out. What happens to us? And it's literally an hourly struggle, because in the morning President Trump says one thing, at lunch he says something else, at dinner he says something else. And if you're President Zelensky, you're just trying to make it through the day.
Now, John, we've just had some breaking news come through in the last few minutes that Iran's Minister of Intelligence has been killed. Can I just get your immediate reaction to that news?
Well, it's back in the U.S. war with Iraq, they had a deck of cards, 52 cards, and they basically named each card after a official in the government of Iraq, and then slowly they got rid of the cards because they killed them all. And in this particular case, intelligence is important. The one challenge, though, when you kill an intelligence officer is intelligence officers are generally the adhesive that a government uses, and within the government, the different perspectives, the conservatives, the liberals, whoever they are. And so you take out an intelligence person, and in this particular moment, that could be problematic. Having said that, though, with the Iranian government, they have a deep bench. They've got a bench that's been around since 1979, and it's generational. So you kill the top one, and number two takes over. You kill number two, it's number three. And so I'm not certain we'll see any major changes because of it, but internally, it may have been a set of the Iranian government to, amongst themselves, figure out their trajectory.
Thank you for that immediate reaction there. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to turn our attention to Europe and the upcoming summit tomorrow. Could you tell me your expectations for that EU summit?
Well, the moment is going to be the $90 billion for Ukraine. It was approved in December. Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary, who has an election coming up on April 12th, initially said he was for it. And then a lot of issues started happening with energy sourcing in Hungary, particularly with Druzhba pipeline. And he then said, well, wait a minute, now I want oil from this pipeline. And then Slovakia chimed in, said, we want it too. And yesterday, they seem to have made a deal where the EU is going to fund, meaning EU taxpayers, the repairs of this pipeline so that Hungary can get oil. It's Russian oil coming through the territory of Ukraine into Europe. So for the Ukrainians, they're apoplectic about it. But it's a pipeline or $90 billion. So I think that's what we're going to see tomorrow. The rumors are that Prime Minister Orban has said okay to that. The 20th sanctions package against Russia, that's moving forward. The 6-month approval of current sanctions, that's moved. So I don't see a lot of drama coming out of it tomorrow. They're going to try to wrap some things up, but all focus is going to be on the $90 billion going to Ukraine, which will be over the next couple of years.
Certainly one to keep an eye out for tomorrow, isn't it? Thank you very much as always, John, for joining us on the programme and providing your analysis.
Thank you.
After the break, we turn to the latest developments in the war involving Iran following the killing of Security Chief Ali Larijani in an Israeli airstrike. Stay tuned.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back to A News. Tehran has warned of a decisive response after Israel killed Iranian security chief Ali Larijani, the most senior official to be killed since the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Joining us to discuss the latest developments in the Middle East is geopolitical analyst Ilan Sialom. Thank you for being with us. Now, I want to just start with that breaking news in the past few minutes that the Minister of Intelligence in Iran has been killed. What's your immediate reaction to that news and what it could mean?
Well, if confirmed, and this means the campaign, the Israeli-American campaign, has moved from decapitating Iran's leadership to blinding its security apparatus. I will say it's very hot news, so I will say that killing the intel minister will strike at the regime capacity, the very regime capacity to detect threats, to control infiltration, and maintain internal coherence. So that will make Iran not just weaker, but potentially more opaque, more paranoid, and more erratic in its response.
So do you think that's telling us more about the Israeli and American strategy here?
Yes, I will say that if we talk about the last development on the ground, if we talk about the Ali Larijani killing, it tells us more about the US-Israeli strategy. The goal seems not just to eliminate individuals, but to remove the people who give the system coherence. If you kill the military chiefs, the political coordinators, and the internal security managers, you force the regime into a more fragmented and reactive posture. So on succession, if we talk about Ali Larijani, maybe they can appoint someone formally, but in practice, Larijani's role is much harder to replace than just his title.
And how is Iran managing that process of succession for these people that are getting killed in these airstrikes?
Well, it's a very good question and very difficult one as well. I will say that there is no obvious one-for-one successor to Ali Larijani. This is precisely the point. Larijani was not just holding a title. He was playing, bridging a role between the political leadership, the security apparatus, and crisis management. So replacing that kind of figure is much harder than just filling a formal post. The most likely outcome this is not the emergence of a new Larijani, but maybe a more collective and more, I will say, security-driven management of his portfolio, probably with the Revolutionary Guards, the presidential office, and other senior regime figures, each taking part of that function.
And do you think these killings of Larijani, the Minister of Intelligence, could this have an impact on the overall outcome of the war?
Well, only to a limited but real extent. Larijani killing is unlikely by itself to decide the war. Iran's ability to continue fighting does not depend on one man alone, but he was a key node of the system. He was overseeing both Iran's war management and its effort to find a political exit. So removing him can slow coordination, complicating decision-making process, and narrow the regime room for calibrated response. So the broader significance is cumulative. His death comes as part of a wider decapitation campaign against Iran's leadership and international security apparatus. In that sense, the impact is less tactical than systemic. It weakens coherence at the top, it increases stress inside the chain of command and control, and may empower harder line actors who are less flexible politically. So I will say that Larijani death probably won't determine the outcome of war on its own, but it can shape the way the war is managed, making Iran's response less coherent, more rigid, and potentially more escalatory.
Now, if we turn our attention to another front in this war, we're hearing reports that Israel has launched a series of strikes on Lebanon's capital, Beirut. Could you talk us why this has become one of the fronts in this conflict?
Well, Iran's proxies still matter because they can widen the war even if they cannot win it for Tehran. So if we talk about Lebanon, this is no longer a peripheral front. Israel is now striking, as you know, not only Hezbollah traditional strongholds in the southern suburbs, but central Beirut itself. So this is clearly an escalation. But militarily, the message is that Israel wants to raise the cost for Hezbollah across the whole Lebanese theater, not just along the border. So politically, it also signals that Lebanon is being treated as a core front by Israel in a wider confrontation with the Iran regional network. So at the same time, Hezbollah has sharply increased its own rocket and drone fire. So this is a cycle, I will say, of mutual escalation. The real risk now is that Beirut become both a military and a symbolic battlefield with very high humanitarian and regional consequences.
Now, you talk about the proxies in this war. What impact can the proxies make? As you say, you think they can't win the war for Tehran, but they could have a significant impact.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the different proxies. If we talk about Hezbollah, they can stretch Israel in Lebanon. Same with Iraqi militias, with the US assets on the Iraqi territory. If we take the example of the Houthis, they can keep pressure very high and on maritime roads on the Red Sea to the Gulf. So their role is to multiply friction, raise the cost, and regionalize the conflict. So, and this is where, if we agree, I would like to talk a little bit about Somaliland, because it's strategically interesting. It has now explicitly invited Israel to establish a strategic military presence in Berbera, very near of the Bab el-Mandeb. So that means that proxy warfare, if we come back to your question, this proxy warfare can produce a geopolitical backlash, not only more attacks, but new alliances, new footholds, and potentially a broader Israeli security footprint around one of the world's most critical infrastructure choke points.
Thank you for joining us on the programme. Always great to have your analysis. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Now, let's take a look at the major stories from the region. Welcome back to A News. Here are your key stories shaping the region. International concern is mounting after an airstrike in Kabul reportedly hit a rehabilitation centre, causing heavy civilian casualties. According to the latest figures from a UN agency, the death toll stands at 143, while local authorities claim it could be as high as 400. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
The reaction from the international community has been swift and strong following the reported airstrike, which killed more than 400 people and injured over 250 others at a medical facility in Kabul. Multiple organizations, including the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and the Norwegian Refugee Council, have condemned the attack and stressed that medical facilities and civilians must never be targeted. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has called for a prompt, independent and transparent investigation into the incident, emphasizing that those responsible must be held accountable. Officials have reiterated that the laws of war require all parties to distinguish between civilian and military targets, ensure proportionality, and take necessary precautions to avoid harm to civilians. Meanwhile, humanitarian agencies warn that escalating tensions are placing immense strain on Afghanistan's already fragile health system, with reports indicating that at least 6 health facilities have been affected in recent weeks. The United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan says civilians are bearing the brunt of the conflict and has called for an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation. International leaders, including representatives of Europe, Norway and the United Kingdom, have also urged both sides to resolve their differences through dialogue rather than continued violence. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Well, Pakistan is denying claims by the Afghan administration that it targeted the hospital, saying its airstrikes targeted military and terrorist sites in and around Kabul. Our correspondent Hira Mustafa reports from Islamabad.
Pakistan's Information Minister Ataullah Taris says the aerial strikes targeted only military and terrorist infrastructure, including ammunition depots, technical equipment storage sites and installations linked to hostile activity against Pakistan. The minister dismissed the hospital allegations as propaganda, accusing Afghan authorities of pushing false narratives and doctored claims to mislead the public. Taking to the social media platform X, the Afghan Taliban deputy spokesperson claimed the airstrike hit a 2,000-bed hospital, destroying large sections of the building and injuring dozens. The reported airstrike came just hours after both sides exchanged fire along their shared border, leaving at least 4 people dead in Afghanistan. The clashes continuing into a third consecutive week are among the deadliest in recent years. Kabul has condemned Pakistan's airstrikes as a violation of its sovereignty and responded with its own military action, deepening the confrontation started last month. China has stepped in to mediate, urging both sides toward an immediate ceasefire to prevent further escalation. Islamabad maintains that militant groups operating from Afghan territory are behind cross-border attacks, an allegation Kabul denies, urging Pakistan not to blame neighboring countries for its own security failures. In February, a bombing at a Shia mosque in Islamabad killed more than 30 people, which Pakistan also blamed on Afghanistan. Hira Mustafa for A News in Islamabad.
Yesterday, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev held a telephone conversation with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. The leaders discussed rising tensions in the Middle East and their potential impact on the South Caucasus. Chancellor Merz welcomed the ongoing peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia, stressing its importance for regional stability. The call also covered prospects for Azerbaijan-Germany relations and broader cooperation with the European Union. Well, staying in Azerbaijan, Baku is continuing its humanitarian support for Iran with a new shipment of essential supplies. The latest aid delivery includes food, medicine and festive goods ahead of the Nowruz holiday. Gulcin Hojalieva reports from Baku.
Azerbaijan is sending another batch of humanitarian aid to Iran. The assistance is being dispatched in line with instructions from the President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, as part of ongoing efforts to support the needs of the Iranian people. The move follows recent high-level contacts between President Aliyev and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, focusing on providing assistance to a neighboring and friendly nation. In total, the aid amounts to 82 tons and includes a wide range of essential supplies. Of these, 76 tons consist of food and agricultural products, while 4 tons are medicines and 2 tons include medical equipment and supplies. The cargo is being transported by 5 trucks which have already set off toward their destination. With the approach of the Nowruz holiday, special festive packages and traditional holiday goods have also been included in the shipment. Officials say the initiative highlights Azerbaijan's ongoing humanitarian support and solidarity with the people of Iran.
This convoy marks the second humanitarian aid sent from the Republic of Azerbaijan to Iran. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to the Azerbaijani government and people for showing such care and support to our Iranian brothers and sisters during these difficult times. This reflects the shared culture and strong bonds between our nations, where we look out for one another and offer help in times of need.
The convoy is expected to reach Iran in the coming days. It's Gulcin Hojalieva with Avaz Hajiev for A News.
National mourning has been declared in Georgia following the passing of Georgia's longest-serving spiritual leader, who has died at the age of 93. Ilya II led the Georgian Orthodox Church for nearly half a century and helped restore its influence after the Soviet era. Let's take a look.
Ilya II, the spiritual leader of the Georgian Orthodox Church for nearly half a century, has died at the age of 93. The Catholicos Patriarch passed away on Tuesday after being hospitalized with severe internal bleeding, according to senior church officials. He led the church since 1977, overseeing its transformation from an institution suppressed under Soviet rule into the most influential non-state body in Georgia. Born Irakli Gudushauri Shiolashvili in 1933, Ilya II studied theology in Moscow before returning to Georgia, where he rose through the ranks of the clergy. Under his leadership, the church regained prominence, especially after Georgia's independence in 1991, becoming a central pillar of national identity. A landmark agreement in 2002 further strengthened its position, granting the church special rights in education, cultural heritage, and taxation. Ilya II remained one of the most trusted figures in the country, as the church consistently ranked as Georgia's most respected institution. Throughout his tenure, he navigated the country's struggle between traditional values and aspirations for closer ties with Europe. He held conservative views on social issues. His leadership also faced scrutiny over the church's ties to Russia, a sensitive issue in Georgia's political landscape. In later years, he called for peace during the war in Ukraine, warning of the risks of wider conflict. The Holy Synod now has 40 days to elect his successor.
That's your news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for the latest developments on that breaking story from Iran and more. Thank you for watching.